Oftentimes, the end of a story helps explain what's happened in the middle. It helps elucidate even the beginning. Oftentimes the end of the story is really at times where you should even begin, because that's where clarity starts to emerge. Once we dive into the seals of chapters 6 through 8, verse 5, we need to actually begin by looking at the end. Because if we just dive right into the middle, it may seem a bit overwhelming. Chapter 8, verse 1 is the end. It's where the seventh seal is broken. It says, when he, talking about the slain lamb, opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Silence. When we get to the end, when we get to the seventh seal, we receive silence. And the question is, why? Why silence? Why is it that when we get to the seventh seal, we have silence? Because the strange thing is, the first 6 seals are not silent at all. There is chatter, there is talking, there is yelling in all first of the 6 seals. Chapter 6, verse 1, you see one of the living creatures screams, "Come." Chapter 6, verse 3, "Come." Chapter 6, verse 5, "Come." Even in 6, verse 6, you hear this 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages. In chapter 6, verse 7, "Come." In chapter 6, verse 10, the martyrs under the altar in heaven cry out, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Chapter 6, verse 16, in the 6th seal, the evil cries, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." The first 6 seals talk. And then we get to the 7th seal, and there's silence. Why? Why silence? What is the strategy? The only way to answer this question is to actually start back at the beginning. The first six seals will emphasize one clear message. Although they'll have differing images, they'll have differing nuances, the message will be this: Heaven impacts earth. That what happens in heaven impacts earth. In the first 6 seals, you will see this happening time and again. To understand, though, what's happening, we need to remember who this letter is being written to, who the audience is that is receiving the book of Revelation. In chapter 1, and in chapter 2, and in chapter 3, we saw the audience. It is the 7 churches of Asia Minor who are living in the shadow of the Roman Empire. And at this point, at the end of the 1st century, the last living apostle, their pastor, their minister, John, is now exiled to the island of Patmos, and there is no promise that he will return home. And they're asking questions like, is Rome winning? Is this really the kingdom that Christ had in mind? Is this really what it looks like for the gospel of Jesus Christ to expand? Because it looks like we're losing. Is God even listening? Is he even going to respond to us? These churches in Asia Minor are struggling under the fist of the Roman Empire, and in their loneliness, the world is starting to distort, and compromise begins to seep in. In chapter 6, begins to address some of this disorientation by unveiling the nature and the true character of the Roman Empire. The 4 horsemen targets Rome. It targets Rome's narrative. It targets Rome's propaganda. Rome is this empire that really speaks with the grammar of 2 weapons, violence and death. That's Rome. Rome is bent on conquest. Rome is the ones that brings peace. It depends on which side of the sword you're on, whether or not you consider it peace or frankly, an assault. Rome is the one that gives you benevolence, that takes care of you. Rome is the one that ultimately is the protector of all. Revelation chapter 6 says, not everything is as it actually appears. Chapter 6, verse 1, we see the first horseman ride out in verse 2 after the living creature cries out in verse 1, "Come." Verse 2, "I looked, and there before me was a white horse." and its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. The first horseman is a conqueror bent on conquest. Second horseman, chapter 6, verse 4. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth, to take peace from the earth. I'm going to say it a third time, to take peace from the earth. This is huge. And to make people kill each other. Here's why this is so significant. In the first century, everyone would have agreed that Rome is bent on conquest. That Rome is the one that's looking to expand the empire through violence and through death. But Rome recouched that. And one of the key phrases that Rome would use is the Pax Romana, which is Latin for the peace of Rome. Matter of fact, on their coins, they would have the goddess of Pax, and she would at times be lighting fire to weapons because you don't need it anymore because we've brought you peace. Rome really couched itself as the bearer of Pax, the giver of peace. But if you actually talked to some of the people they were conquering, peace is not the word they would use. As a matter of fact, a Roman historian by the name of Tacitus wrote a book called Agricolae, which is talking about his father-in-law, who was this general in Britain. And in this one moment in Agricolae, Tacitus recounts a British chieftain by the name of Calgacus, who, as Rome was starting to come and starting to take over his city, he begins to cry out. He says, "You come and you pillage our cities and you call it prosperity. You come and you take away our children and you take away our wives and you call it peace." Rome's propaganda was that we are the bearers of Pax. But Revelation chapter 6 says they are bent on conquest and they actually don't bring peace. Second horseman, they take peace and make people kill each other. Third horseman comes and in Revelation chapter 6 verse 5, the third living creature cries out, "Come!" And a black horse appears. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. And then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures, verse 6, saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, but do not damage the oil and the wine. Okay, that's confusing. So let me explain what's happening here. He comes out holding a pair of scales, which is the symbol for economy. It's in the marketplace, how you know what to pay for the goods that you're buying. A scale. But the proclamation is absurd. A 2 pounds of wheat would barely be just a part of the just basic necessities of the day. The problem is you don't need just wheat for the basic necessities of the day. You need multiple things. 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages? Everything I make in a day doesn't even get me all that I need for the basic necessities? 6 pounds of barley? Again, it is something that you need just for the day. And it's not even the only thing you need for that day. And that also costs a day's wages? It's saying this. This is inflation like we've never seen before. But notice what isn't touched. Do not damage the oil and the wine. Oil and wine was not daily necessities. It was not basic needs. That was luxury. So this is what the third horseman is doing. He is ravaging the economy, privileging the rich, and further oppressing the poor. So you have a rider that's bent on conquest, one that takes away peace, doesn't give it, one that destroys economies, privileging the rich, and then comes the fourth horseman. Chapter 6, verse 8, I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. The word pale there is like, it's like a greenish color, almost like in the cartoons whenever somebody was on a ship and they're about to vomit. It's that color of green, a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades, the caretaker of the underworld, was following close behind him. And they were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Notice this, all four horsemen, this is how they march. Rome may say that it is this benevolent empire, but they are bent on conquest. They take away peace. They ravage economies, privileging the rich and devastating the poor, and they bring death. They bring hell to the earth. And the Christians of the first century are going, so you see me. You see what we're struggling with. You see what we're encountering. And the question then becomes this: when Rome is marching, when the four horsemen of Rome are moving, what happens to Christians? Enter the fifth seal. Verse 9, when the Lamb opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain, so martyrs, because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained, just like Antipas. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord? Holy, holy, holy. How long, Almighty One? Holy and true, until you judge the earth dwellers." In the book of Revelation, the number one name for evil that is on earth is earth dwellers, the inhabitants of the earth. The number one name for those that follow Jesus, holy ones, which we typically translate saints. But I like using the word holy ones. Why? Because a part of their name comes from the name of God. Holy, holy, holy. How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the earth dwellers and avenge our blood? Here's what's interesting. The martyrs are looking for vengeance. Why? Because when you've been wronged, you're convinced, I'm convinced, that vengeance will make me feel better. Problem is, it doesn't. Vengeance is a cheap reward for the pain that you've gone through. Grace is far more powerful than vengeance. And one of the things I find fascinating here is even the martyrs who we put up on a pedestal seem to not understand or able to see clearly. Verse 11 clarifies. Then each of the martyrs was given a white robe. That's what's interesting. White robes, we've already talked about this in the book of Revelation, stands for victory. God looks at him and he says, what makes you think that if you've died under the feet of the four horsemen, what makes you think that that's not us winning? Here's your white robe, and listen to his response. And they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed, just as they had. How long do you avenge our blood? Avenge your blood? You've already won. And you want to know what? More of you need to die. This is one of the mysteries of following a slain lamb. If you actually are following a slain lamb, don't be surprised when he asks you to carry your own cross. Does that sound familiar? I mean, if anybody wants to come after me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, then come follow me. Too often, we actually create a Christianity that serves us, where if we follow Jesus, then we will receive this blessing or this benefit. Or the call of the cross is this: you are not servant greater than your master. And if your master has been executed, don't be surprised when you do. But here's the secret that Revelation unveils. And when you are killed, we win. We win. Now hear me very clearly. Hear me. I need to pause and say this. What I am not saying is that you need to stay in an abusive relationship because that's how we win. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm not saying is that oppression is okay because that's how we win. That's not what I'm saying. Governments deserve to be confronted if they're oppressing their people. Abusive spouses deserve to be confronted if they are abusing people. But what I am saying is this: whenever all options have been exhausted and the governments are still crushing you, your enemies are still finding you, just know that your death on a cross is not a loss. In the kingdom of God, it is victory. It's how we win, when we live our lives in the shape of the cross. The sixth seal comes in verse 12. I watched as he opened the sixth seal, and what happens after this is all of creation begins to fold. This is the end of the world. The sun turned like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. Stars falling to the earth, that'd be the end of the earth. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. It's the end of everything. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, sevenfold, referring to all of evil in creation, hid in caves and among the rocks. And they called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. To call on the mountains and the rocks is a way of referring to calling upon the deities and the idols that you worshiped to protect you. because the mountains were considered the places where humanity could get the closest that they could get to divinity. And the rocks would be referring to the actual idols that were crafted in the image of their deities. Evil is calling for their gods to fight the Lamb. And then verse 17 says this, "For the great day of their wrath has come. The end of judgment day is here, and who can stand?" Here's the important thread, though, I want to trace. I know we've gone through all 6 seals, but here's the important thread I want you to trace. 6 different times I said this. The Lamb broke the seal. The Lamb broke the seal. The Lamb, 6 different times. Why is that significant? Because the Lamb is in heaven, and yet what he does in heaven is impacting the earth. Why? Because the veil between heaven and earth is not as thick as we assume. That the veil between heaven and earth is actually quite thin. That every single thing that happens in the seals is still under the sovereignty of God. It is still within his ability and his power to redeem. The first 6 seals very clearly say, whatever happens in heaven impacts earth. For every time the Lamb does something, something happens. And then comes the 7th seal. In the 7th seal, chapter 8, verse 1, we receive silence. When he opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And the question that we asked at the beginning of this video is, why? Why? The answer comes in verses 3 and 4, where one thing is repeated twice. Verse 3, another angel who had a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all God's people. On the golden altar in front of the throne, the smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of God's people, went up before God from the angel's hand. You see, if the first 6 seals emphasize that heaven impacts earth, what we see in the 7th seal is that earth impacts heaven. That what we do down here is received in heaven. Matter of fact, it is so significant that all of heaven grows silent when the prayers of the saints come into the heavenly throne room. You see, whenever the veil is thinned, we begin to realize, we begin to understand that the central to the revelation of Jesus Christ is this message: you are not alone. That your prayers are not just bouncing off the ceiling back down to you. That God is with you, and that what you are experiencing on earth is being received by heaven. It will be responded to by heaven. It will not go unaccounted for. For what we do on earth impacts heaven. Why? Because in the book of Revelation, worship is war. It's how we fight. Ultimately, offering our entire selves as a living sacrifice in the same way that Christ did for us, in the same way that the slain lamb did for us, the one that is worthy to break open the scrolls. In the same way that the lamb was slain for us, we know that on earth we can give all of ourselves to him. Why? Because what we do impacts heaven. And to me, that's good news.